Hi, kindergarten! This week, we're going to be learning about texture. And to help us out, we have a little video from Scratch Garden. Now that you've seen some of those textures, we're going to get started using texture in our drawing of a wild thing. Let's get started. All right, kindergarten, today you are going to be drawing a wild thing. Your wild thing is kind of like a monster, and it's inspired by the book, Where the Wild Things Are. Today, you are going to need a handy dandy pencil. You're gonna need an eraser. You're going to need a black marker. It could be a regular Crayola marker or a Sharpie. If you don't have one of these, it could always be a crayon. You are also gonna need a box of crayons and a white paper from your art bag. To get started today, we're going to use this paper as inspiration to help us think about what we need to draw on our wild thing. You are going to need a face, a body, feet, eyes, nose, mouth, tails, and some details. To get started, I want you to think about the space you have on your paper. We want to fill up from top to bottom, making our wild thing big on our paper. So I'm going to think about how large I want my head to be and kind of draw it out with my finger first, and then I'm going to draw it in pencil. I'm going to choose this face as inspiration for my head of my wild thing. And it's going to look a little something like that. Next, he needs a body. I'm gonna go for more of a rectangular shaped body. Maybe it's gonna be a little bit skinnier at the top and a little wider at the bottom. Next, I need some feet, and I know I wanna go all the way down to the bottom of the paper so that I fill up my space. I want him to have those pointy toes, just like that. I need to give him some eyes. I'm gonna look at the types of eyes I have here. I think I'm gonna go with these teardrop shaped eyes. It's called a teardrop shape sometimes. Sometimes it's called a raindrop shape. Inside of there, I need a circle with another circle inside for his pupil. He needs a nose. I think I'm gonna go with this kind of nose for my guy. Remember that you can use your creativity. You do not have to draw the same wild thing that I do. You could choose different eyes, nose, or mouth for your wild thing. Whatever you want it to look like, you create it that way. I kind of use that mouth right there. Next, I'm gonna give him a tail. I want his tail to be like this one with a furry thing at the end. Next, I'm gonna give him some details. You can choose any kind of details you wanna add to your wild thing. Be creative. You can use your own original ideas. You don't have to use the details on this paper, but I do want you to draw some details. You could do horns, you could do a mane around his head, you could do scales, you could do zigzags, you could give him some wings, like one of these two wings, maybe some ears or some feathers. I am going to start by giving him some ears. Inside his ears, I'm going to create the texture to make it look like he has hair inside of his ears. I'm going to give him some teeny tiny horns. And then I'm going to give him a mane around the side of his head, making it look like he has little pieces of hair. On his belly, I'm going to give him some big scales, a scaly texture. Could be drawn like this. Next, on his legs, I'm gonna give him a zigzag line to make it kind of look spiky. And I also want to give this guy some arms. Maybe I could use some of these feet ideas to help me draw a hand on my monster too. All right, okay. I have my monster and he has a bunch of different textures. A hairy texture I drew a scaly texture, a pointy texture or spiky texture. I drew a furry texture around the side of his head. Next, I want you to take a black marker or a Sharpie and I want you to trace over top of your pencil lines. Remember, tracing is going over top of what you've already done with another material. In this case, it's a Sharpie or a black marker. Make sure you take your time and go slow while you're tracing. You want to try to stay right on top of those pencil lines. Once you have your monster traced, you're going to use your crayons and we are going to be creating texture rubbings. A texture rubbing is when you take a crayon and a surface that has some sort of texture on it and you create a rubbing. I'm going to show you how. All right, so I found this that has kind of like a scaly looking texture on it, and what I want you to do is take your little wild thing on an adventure onto this object and lay your paper on top of it, and then I want you to rub that crayon back and forth across the paper. It's okay if you get outside your lines a little bit, because next time we're going to use a parent's help and we are going to cut this wild thing out. So rub that texture onto your wild thing. I'm going to rub that same texture on my wild thing's other foot. I'm holding that paper down tight, making sure it doesn't wiggle wobble around, and making sure to completely color the whole thing all the way down into his little toes. I'm going to do a different texture on his belly. The texture that I found on his belly is going to come from the bottom of this shoe. Oftentimes the bottom of the shoes have really cool textures. You should check yours out. I'm going to lay that paper right on top of there, and I'm going to choose my next color that I want for his belly. I'm going to rub that on his belly, and the texture is appearing. This is a visual texture because you can see it with your eyes, but you can't actually feel it on your artwork. I'm going to finish his whole belly. Now his belly has a texture. I need to think about a texture for his arms and his hands. I found this box with a bumpy texture. I'm going to put my paper on top of there, pick another color crayon, and I'm going to rub that bumpy texture onto his arms. All right, once you did 3 texture rubbings on your artwork, you can just color the rest of him. I'm gonna color his face and his mouth and his ears and his horns and his tail. I want you to color those things on yours too. All right, I think I'm all done coloring my wild thing. I colored it all his pieces, his little pieces of hair, his ears, his horn, his mouth, his belly, his feet, his arms, and his tail. I think he looks wonderful. That is all we're gonna do with our wild thing this week. First, we drew him in pencil. Then we outlined him in Sharpie. Then we created some crayon rubbings to create texture on our wild thing. And we finished him off by coloring any extra things we had. Make sure you do at least 3 crayon rubbings on your wild thing somewhere. Remember, it's okay if you get outside your lines a little bit. Next time, we're just gonna cut that off when we finish off this artwork by creating a landscape in the background. I hope you had fun creating your wild thing in your drawing artwork today, and I can't wait to create with you next time.